Good afternoon, YouTube. Welcome to Ferret Facevale Productions. So today we're going on the first ride on the GPX Moto FSE 300R. I think for me, the GPX bikes have really changed what your expectations should be for a $5,000 to $6,000 bike, or even a $4,000 bike if you're talking about the 250E. In a place where this market usually brings in some of our Japanese dual sports, like the KLX 300 or CRF 250L or 300L, they generally come with lackluster suspensions. They weigh far over 300 pounds. And they're not very exciting bikes to ride. They're a good compromise maybe between on and off-road, but they don't give you anything that you really want for off-road use, especially for really what's a lot of money. I've personally spent years bouncing back and forth between many dual sports, and finding an amazing trail bike among them is not easy. The dual overhead cam 300 GPX 300R is no powerhouse. It's not a race bike, but it has a 300 motor that is very, very strong. It's fuel injected, it runs quite well, and has a mid-range power band that is fantastic for trail riding. Pair that with the fact that you get a suspension that is on par with my Sachs Beta suspension, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. If anything, a lot of us have been spending a lot of years looking for a bike that fits the bill like these do. Do they make an awesome on-road or dual sport bike? Maybe not as well as something like a DRZ 400, because the 400 weighs so much that it's very stable on the road. That being said, a lot of these bikes are fantastic on the road up to about 60-65, where you'd want to gear them up taller. I don't think any dual sport I've ever ridden has necessarily been good on the road, and these are no exception. I think too often these GPX bikes get compared to something like a KTM or even a Beta. Now, they did copy a lot of things from the KTM realm, of course, and a lot of it really is not the same or even a direct copy. The forks are completely different, so is the rear suspension. They share some of the seals, but a lot of the components on the bike, to include the engines, are their own design. So far, everything on these bikes, between all four of them that we've had, and then we even had the two-stroke model about a year and a half ago, has been very reliable and robust. And pretty much anything that you would expect to break on a normal dual sport has been par for the course with these GPX bikes. They've been very reliable, strong, and overall just a great bike for the money. And when we compare these to an actual KTM, yes, they're not as high quality. Some of the fit and finish isn't quite up there with the $12,000 bikes, and some of your engine power is not there, and your intervals for the engines, of course, are much longer on these Zongshen motors compared to that of a KTM, which I actually think is a plus. Many of us don't ever use the power offered by these KTM bikes, or I'm going to call Euro bikes in general. Many of us just want a very good trail bike that we can bash on the weekends and have fun and not worry about its weight or capability constantly and wanting to feel like, or feeling like we have to buy another bike just dedicated to a specific type of riding. The 300 combines an engine that has enough power to be useful on the road, as well as having plenty of power to rip through the woods. Even in areas where you're hitting single track and need to slip the clutch a little and give it some gas and maybe pick the front end over some obstacles and stuff, the 300 was phenomenal. It weighs a little bit more than the 250E, but I thought the trade-off was pretty good, actually. The 250, I'm still getting the carburetor dialed in, but I feel like at the higher altitudes, she just needs a little bit more skill, if you will, to get over certain objects. The types of bikes and the engines that you prefer are always personal preference, and I tend to like that low to mid-range, very torquey four-stroke. I like lugging up hills, and I like dragging myself, sometimes being a little bit lazier on the shifts and such. So I tend to like the motors that might be a little bit bigger and have a little bit more weight, but I can actually maybe ride a little bit slower sometimes and have it not be detrimental in certain areas. And the 300 was fantastic for this type of riding. I found myself easily, this was my first ride out at this single track, and I found it easy to adjust to its power band and getting over stuff and where I needed to accelerate, where I needed to let off. One of the biggest downsides that I did not like about this engine is actually the engine braking. The engine braking on this 300 is monstrous. In fact, it is far more engine braking than even my Beta 390 has, which is, it was not really a good thing. It led to some jerkier areas where you just kind of wanted to let off and coast a little bit. Very easy to adjust to this engine type because all you got to do is pull in your clutch and kind of roll down things a little bit more. Not something that I was used to doing, so every bike is different and you got to kind of adjust to it. I've also seen that some people have tuned this out of the GPX bikes, so there is always room for improvement and tinkering with your bikes. Now the top end of this Zongshen 300 definitely tapers off. It doesn't have a hard power hit. It isn't uncontrollable. Really has nothing like the feel of something like a race bike or a top end peaky feel. It has a very wide linear power band. I would say down very low at its RPM range. It isn't super great right off of idle. In fact, you definitely have to get kind of into the bottom of the mid-range to really start feeling that power. But the way that the GPX bikes come geared, honestly, first gear is about perfect for riding at that kind of mid-range RPM, even at slower single-track speeds. I do feel that the power of this engine is very close to being on par with like my old Suzuki DR350. It really provides a torquey experience with a little bit of mid-range, and it makes it a very fun engine to ride with. Now as we move on to the suspension is the SZC suspension. So of course this is a Chinese branded suspension that emulates, I believe, an open cartridge design. They use standard off-the-shelf KTM seals, so they're relatively easy to rebuild, but they have compression and rebound adjustment that was very helpful. On this single track, I had to tone down the forks a fair bit so I wasn't bouncing all over the place. Hadn't adjusted the suspension before, so there's nothing wrong with that. But we had a lot of fun adjusting to the terrain. And the forks and such, they were phenomenal. I need to dial in the rear shock, I think, a little bit more. But overall, I think the experience of using the bike and the suspension was, at this price point, I don't think I've ever felt a bike quite like this. It wasn't too squishy. It was pretty well suspended, and I thought going over hard bumps and ledges and such, it was very controlled and easy to dial in. By far, though, I don't think I've ever been on a dual sport or another bike in this price range that has had a suspension this capable. Let's talk about the frame, the plastics, and overall design of the bike. We kind of talked about a little bit of being KTM-esque, but of course, this is not really a direct KTM, of course. The good news is that the plastics, the decals, and pretty much everything on the bike are very high quality. They're flexible, not brittle plastics. I dropped the bike more than a few times the other day on this trail and did not break or really even scratch anything up too bad. The frame is of course coated, and it seems like it's welded pretty well. I haven't seen any trouble or problem spots where I think that the frame may crack or break over time. I'm not a huge fan of how the rear subframes are done on this style of bike with I guess KTM/Husky rear subframe design. You're really going to want to add some grab straps to the back so you can actually pull the bike without feeling like you're going to break the rear off. The overall quality really reminds me of the dual sport market as a whole. Japanese dual sports, things along like my old DRZ 400. The quality is very similar overall to that bike, and in some areas I think it's better. There's a lot of refinement in some areas that they've taken cues from the Austrians, of course, and that's a great thing to see. We have not seen a lot of innovation from the Japanese market in this space in a long time, and while the Chinese have copied some things, in some ways they've made it their own, really. Now Now the 300R with some protection bits and a full tank of gas weighed in at 288 pounds for me on the scales, so I did a video on that. We can throw a card up there where I weigh 2 of the GPX bikes, and Meeker Extreme also weighed 2 of his bikes as well. So I feel like 288 pounds with a full tank of gas and pretty much ready to ride is actually a very good weight. That comes in below most of the Japanese dual sports. Combined with a lot of the other features, I did not feel like this bike was too terribly heavy. Its little brother, the 250E, was weighing in at 273 pounds, so you do save some weight that way, and it's a little bit more flickable through the tight stuff. But at no point did I feel like this bike was super heavy. Not compared to something like my DR350, which tips in at 300 pounds and then some. Your wheels and other components that are, I guess, strapped in and around the bike, even the stock sprocket and chain seem to be very good quality from the factory. The wheels I was very happy with. They actually seem very high quality. Haven't had any problems with any of the bikes so far in that regard. The only advice that I have is that the metals on this bike seem to be a little bit softer, so pay attention to when you're torquing stuff down. Don't go ham on it. Either get a torque wrench and actually properly set your correct torque weights, or just snug stuff down with some Loctite. That's generally what I did. I had this problem with my DRZ over the years, to where if you just monkeyed on it too hard, you're gonna be retapping some holes. I do also want to note that the headlight that the GPX Motos come with is very usable. It's a very bright LED headlight. Looks good, works very well. You can turn the light off with the switch on the hand guard, so you're not burning power if you dump the bike, or turn it off and forget to or stop and forget to turn the bike off. You won't kill a battery. I was a huge fan of that, and at nighttime was very usable on the street. These bikes also come with turn signals. Very easy to hook all that stuff up, and of course we do have the street legal. The longer I rode this bike throughout Dud Bob's Trail and down Chinaman Gulch, I came to the realization that these bikes, for the money, are such a good deal. Even if they do have some problems, or you have to cash in some of the warranty claims that Gary makes, because GPX Moto is based out of Utah, and they have almost all your parts are going to be in stock and ready to ship to you at any given time, that these bikes offer so much in the way of having a fantastic riding experience and not having to worry about waiting months on end to get parts. The support for these bikes has made me very happy, and the community behind them on Facebook has made the transition to working on these bikes as well as playing with these bikes just a really refreshing experience. As we get more time on these bikes, and as these bikes get rented through our ANMMototoys.com, we'll find what problems they're going to have and what's going to break. And of course, a lot of things might be user error, a lot of things might be some defects. We've found a few things that aren't perfect on these bikes, but I don't think I've ever owned a dirt bike that is perfect. At the end of the day, the FSE 300R does everything you want it to, and then more. I think today we took out on a trail that's far harder and far more difficult than most people are going to ride these bikes on, and I was nothing but smiles all day. I don't think at any time that I wanted something lighter, or I needed more power, or that I thought that the engine was tuned poorly. I never had any of those thoughts. It really came down to riding and concentrating on the bike itself, and learning the bike, and getting over obstacles, and becoming a better rider myself. This was my second ride of the year, so it might be a little rough. I'll apologize for that now. At the end of the day, GPX Motos aren't perfect, but they offer excellent value in a market where $6,000 doesn't get you a lot these days. And while we might feel like we have to buy a $12,000 bike to have a hard enduro kind of ride and lots of fun and save a little bit of weight, GPX Moto offers something that nobody else does. And that's why I think these bikes will come to be very popular in the near future, especially while being supported by a local company in Utah that stocks all the parts and is willing to ship them out and pretty much overnight them to your house. I haven't seen any reason to doubt the GPX Moto bikes, and I've been very impressed, and I hope you guys are too. Overall, if you have any questions or comments, throw them down below, and please like and subscribe as we follow the journey of all of these four-stroke GPX bikes and our rentals, as well as the adventures of Ferret Face and everything else that we tend to get ourselves into. Well, thanks for watching, guys. We really appreciate it. Come back next time. I'll finally have my helmet mic fixed, and we'll do some actual talking while riding. That's how I prefer to do things. But till then, I will catch you all in the next one. Ferret Face out.